Director of Strategy, Architecture, Innovation at Colt. He is the Director, Strategy, Architecture, and the Innovation. Has been with Colt for 15 years, starting out as an IP engineer. Before moving into this role, he was in charge of security engineering and operation. He holds engineering degree in networking and distributed computing and is recognized authority on service provider security as well as next-gen architecture. Nicolas.
Thank you. It's one big family anyway, right? So we all know each other, we're all big friends. So I'll pretend to work for Telecom Italia today. It's okay. I think it's an opportunity to give you an introduction keynote here at this event. As you said, it's been around for like 16, 18 years. Everything is gravitating around MPLS. Looks like MPLS won't be going away. And I think through the presentation, you will also see that a lot of the foundations we're building are actually on top of MPLS and evolving MPLS, and SDN and NFV are just things gravitating around it. I also want to give you the opportunity to share with you the reality check. I think you mentioned reality check. I think that's pretty important. It's been 5 years into SDN and NFV. To some extent, NFV is a little bit younger still, and we still see a lot of teething issues. And for people who have seen presentations by myself or colleagues at Colt, we always try to push the boundaries. Look beyond the marketing slides, actually try out stuff, put it into production, get customer feedback and see what it does for us and what it does for our customers. So in here, what I want to do is really tell you what we've been doing with SDN and NFV, what works, what doesn't, and what we've done about it. And we actually turned it into a customer experience. So for very long, SDN and NFV was very much under the hood stuff. It was infrastructure related. You were doing changes that were not visible to customers. It is things they would consume, services that we rely on, but you wouldn't expose it to customers directly. And I think we started to see the shift, not just at Colt, but also with other service providers, where the customer experience element is becoming key. So the question is really that I want to answer through this presentation. What do we do building on top of MPLS, SDN, and NFV that turns into customer experience, and how we've done it. This is actually live. So this is live. We have customers on it, and we keep building on what we call Novitas, which is the internal code name for the Colt on-demand program. The vision is pretty simple. I think you've seen very similar slides for quite some time. We want to make sure that network services can be self-provisioned, orchestrated, automated in near real time by customers directly. We want to put the customers in control of their network services and everything that comes on top of those services. And also an important piece, which is the one I'm going to conclude my presentation on later on, is we want to make sure it actually works end to end. So there is no point anymore today as a service provider to be seen as an isolated island. You mentioned cloud providers. Connectivity to the rest of the world is key. And what we want to make sure is that this experience is actually available to our customers. So the integration with third-party networks is something you're going to see more and more happening in the industry. From a service point of view, I think there's nothing new there. Providing elastic bandwidth, elastic services, elastic topology, make it available either through a portal or through APIs. We start to see a slow shift towards APIs. I think everybody wants to consume APIs. The reality is a lot of the people still, want to go back to an online portal. What it also does is, help us reduce costs. Again, I think that was the big theme when SDN started. It was going to help with capex and opex. The reality is, it did very little. I think that's the reality we've seen. We still see the opportunity, though, that this transformation we started is going to help manage our cost base in our unit cost, and also help reduce vendor dependency. Again, people said SDN and NFV, this whole let's embrace openness is going to change the industry. We'll be completely independent from any vendors. Everything will be built on top of open APIs. You can rip and replace whenever you like it. The reality is, your business processes, the integration work you need to do, slows you down. So it actually helped again, but it didn't provide this fantastic complete new world. But I think it's really slowly getting there. This is a very simplified picture of what we call the Novitas or Colt demand architecture. Again, nothing fancy. You've seen very similar slides. On top you see the external interfaces in red towards our customer or operations teams. Where they can use either the portal and API to talk to the Novitas engine. And at the bottom part, you see the various network domains. Again, it's probably very similar in the organization. At the bottom in the blue boxes, you see the various network elements. We're building everything on top of Carrier Ethernet. For us, Carrier Ethernet has become the transport access of choice. There's the IP MPLS services, a packet optical core for long distance. And on the right-hand side, what we're building when it comes to an NFV infrastructure cloud. And then in the middle, all the green building blocks, you see the various NMS, EMS, OSS systems, SDN controllers, if you have some, abstraction layers that you need to actually manage and configure your network. So that's kind of mostly the existing environment we're building on. And then on the left-hand side, in gray and blue, you see the IT systems. And for very long, the network guys have kind of ignored the IT stack. And you realize that, and people thought that, we're building something completely new, we'll completely decouple it from the IT systems. Well, the reality is, the customer experience you want to provide still needs to be an end-to-end experience for the customer, and there, integrating, at least to some extent, with your IT stack is pretty key. And that's, we'll see, is where we also spend a lot of time on. I only listed some of the key building blocks when it comes to IT. We really try to only interface with the OSS and BSS systems we have to interface with, but you see pretty quickly the list becomes quite long, and there's many more systems we're running, because again, like many others in the industry, we have quite a legacy when it comes to the internal system stack. The piece which is key is actually the one in greenish with this little brain. It's the Novitas engine. So that's what we build ourselves. So for very long, people were contemplating how to build something on top of SDN and NFV. Could they just consume some commercial off-the-shelf system? Could they use open source? Could they combine both? Can you just glue it together and hope it's going to work? Or are you going to pick a third-party orchestrator to do that? I think in the end, and I think you will see it throughout the presentation, it is what makes you different from the others. So building this is actually going to become your core DNA. And again, we started pretty early with this, and we're seeing a very similar movement happening in the industry, when looking at peers. For us, the SDN and NFV architecture over time turned into more of what we call a choreography stack. Really some sort of an orchestrator that we put together ourselves. And it is basically made of 3 building blocks. This Novitas engine, the various network domain orchestrators, and a network that can actually program. And the end result that we want is actually, a next generation customer experience. Not so much a pure infrastructure evolution and under the hood stuff. There's still many under the hood things happening all over time. But those 3 key things, is what will deliver in the next generation customer experience. And this is what customers want. They've been, shifting clearly from ordering stuff for many years on paper, e-order, sometimes e-bonding, on very long contract terms, to what the various cloud providers, do, credit card based, 4 minutes, completely on demand. So how do you actually, merge best of both worlds? I think the view that you can turn a telco into a cloud provider, that won't happen. There's too much, to do. You cannot recreate, a DNA that doesn't exist in the telco from scratch. You can change it slowly, but creating afresh is very, very complex. The reason we've done it this way, and we actually moved up the stack. So basically what we've done, before we were looking very much at the network level, the control plane, the network hardware, the control elements, and we try to tune those, to make them more agile. We actually moved up the stack. And we started to abstract some of those layers. And this orchestration engine we've built, actually enabled us to do that, to really decouple the systems. So the first version we put out there in early 2015, was completely self-contained. Because, again, as soon as you start to talk to your IT friends, they say, come back in, 12 months, and it's going to be complex, it's going to be very long. The system doesn't have any APIs. You have to write everything from scratch. It's repeat over and over. So to prove that the concept actually works, we decided to go down the path of a minimum viable product approach, and really created the Novitas engine as completely self-contained. So all the IT elements, if you remember on the previous slide, around inventory, pricing and quoting, address book and everything else, we just recreated, very small, very lightweight in the Novitas engine, And then when we had the customer feedback and understood how it worked, we really started to integrate with the existing IT systems in the second phase. And that, first of all, enabled us to actually test with customers, get feedback, without having the very long waterfall development cycle. And it actually also enables us to start to replace some of those OSS and BSS systems. Because today, most of those OSS BS systems is actually the ones that actually run the company. It's your performance engine, and trying to rip and replace those elements is very, very, very complicated. What we're doing there is really starting to recreate pieces and elements on the Novitas side, kind of, for example, overlaying some very lightweight inventory on top of our very heavyweight inventory system. But over time, the idea is that we switch around and that what we build in Novitas becomes the primary, and then we can then, slowly end of life and remove the existing legacy IT systems. The other thing that we realized, over a year ago, roughly, is that there is no point trying to do greenfield. I think for a long time, the premises of SDN was that, it will be the next big thing, it will be a complete greenfield environment that you will start from scratch. The reality is we're actually augmenting things that exist. MPLS, BGP, your existing control plane, the PCE engines. So all of that, we actually augment it using this Novitas engine and by bringing in, small incremental changes. And we're also doing it, as I mentioned, with customers, customer focus. So we talk to customers all the time. We get them onto early field trials. We ask them what they want, and we also look at what they use. So the analytics you get out of such an engine are very, very useful because there's, what the customers ask you for, and then for you as vendors, for example, what they buy from you. There's the pipeline, there's the reality, and we have a little bit of the same. So it really helps us, in this manner. The other thing we're doing is switching to DevOps, and it's actually not real DevOps. So we're following, a Kanban model, but the reality is the rest of the company is still very much waterfall. So how do you merge, kind of the best of both worlds, where you have on one side a team that is building the Novitas engine, the Novitas portal, the Novitas APIs in a very agile way, and then the rest of the company still very much in waterfall mode, but you try to drag them into a more of an agile world. So this balance is very hard. I call it magic because it's nicer. The reality is, it takes a lot of effort. The project management, the governance you have to do around it, so that the people who think agile and the people who think waterfall actually, actually meet somewhere in the middle and actually deliver something. That's the magic. And the other element, as I already mentioned, is the secret sauce. I think everybody realizes now that we can all buy the same hardware, we can all buy the same software, we can all use the same open source tools. We can merge all of that, and I think the secret sauce, the IPR, what's going to make a difference going forward is the customer experience and this engine that you can build, because that's what's going to drive your performance engine going forward. On the orchestrator side, nothing has really changed much. I think SDN, we all realized, turned into automation. There were a lot of promises, a lot of things, new protocols, new ways of doing things. You have to start completely afresh. Again, for us, the way we consume SDN or the way we deploy SDN actually enables us to do things, really automate what we want to do and program the network. And, to some extent, run it hotter. So what you get nowadays with PCE, with segment routing and all those more recent additions is very much a way to get make a better use of your own network. What we haven't achieved yet, and that's my battle at the moment, is the more fundamental OSS and manual changes. OSS changing OSS is hard, because of the things we mentioned. There's quite some legacy you carry forward. There's a customer experience that already exists. There's things customers are used to. So how do you introduce all those virtual elements into an existing OSS system that only understands physical links? So all those things, all those new layers you had on top, we haven't addressed yet in the right manner. And if you look at the heat map of the various OSS and manual approaches of vendors, there's so many different ways of doing the same thing with so many overlaps. I don't think the industry there has very much consolidated enough yet to have a single view. That's maybe a little bit too harsh, but a set of views on how you should build your OSS and manual stack going forward for such a thing. The other element is, how do you best inject and consume open source? I think all of us, are big believers in open source. At the same time, commercial off the shelf is not going to go away. And, again, you need to find a way to merge, open source elements, commercial off the shelf, and what you're building internally. And again, to me, that's really the magic sauce. How do you make this happen in the right manner? The open source elements, we've been spending the last 12 months doing much more open source than we used to do before, because historically we didn't do that much open source in Colt. But there's so many things we're learning in the process, and I don't think that a lot of the projects, or actually when you start to combine various elements from various projects, is that easy yet. So there's a lot of overhead still trying to make all those building blocks coming from the open source world getting together. Obviously, people are also looking at commercial variants of those open source tools, but still there's so many different ways, and everybody is doing it in a different way that in the end the devil for us is actually still in the details when it comes to that. The last element, and I think I've been kind of ranting about that one for quite some time, is industry working group consolidation. I think the industry consolidation has started. If you look back the last 6 months, there have been a lot of M&As in this space when it comes to SDN, NFV, carrier Ethernet. So that's actually a good thing, because we couldn't talk and listen to all those vendors anymore. It was just getting all over the place. The working group consolidation, I don't think is there yet. We still see new groups popping up here and there. But honestly, same thing there. I'm really hoping at some point for some umbrella group or some umbrella view to help us with that one, because it's still over the place. And we just discussed yesterday with some other people, even the NFV, which has been around for 3 years now, we still have so many open questions when it comes to the Mano stack. And the sheer complexity we see there, it doesn't help us. So again, we're taking the usual approach we take at Colt, is like, let's try to put it into production and see if it works, and taking shortcut and being very pragmatic. But I think it is time for simplification, because it's way, way, way too complex for us. On the network side, as I mentioned, it's still very much incremental and augment. You won't see a lot of rip and replace. You won't see a lot of greenfield. I think the only exception, I'd say, is in the data center. In the data center, you will see people, building new fabrics. Really, they're using the opportunity from going to 1 gig to 10 gig to 40 gig to 100 gig, to having, starting to have much more virtualization in the data center to actually do something about it. And there, I agree, you will see, the software-defined data center and a very much greenfield approach. When it comes to the metro environment and the WAN and the long-distance elements, it is mostly, building on top of what we have and augmenting what we have. Obviously, in some geographies, you're going to start to have new islands, which will be greenfield, but the end-to-end network is going to be very much a brownfield that you augment. And the other one is, and you see it with this conference, it's been called MPLS something for like 18 years now, or 16 years. MPLS is clearly here to stay. I've been saying that for quite some time. People looked at some alternatives. I think most of the alternatives are kind of dead now. So MPLS is here to stay. It's here to be augmented. We're going to use what we know. It's going to help with the operations team. It's going to help with our OSS transition, so that's pretty good. I think the OTT way of doing things is going to become more common. We'll start to see it slowly with things like, SD-WAN and SD-VPN. So I think we're also trying to understand better, how to run services in OTT manner, but really not completely ignoring the underlying transport. So you'll see a lot of mix and match between, the OTT service layer and the underlying transport, because honestly, the opportunity for service providers that, we own the network, we know how it works, we understand QoS, the OEM elements, and in the business-to-business market we are in, this is key for customers. So they want over-the-top type services, but they want over-the-top with quality of service to simplify, to oversimplify it maybe. So that's key, and I think that's really where service providers can still benefit a lot from their existing assets that they have out there. On the network side, we also still see a lot of teasing issues, and honestly, NFV is one of those. I think, we've been talking, me and my colleagues, for many, many years about virtual CPE. For us, virtual CPE is the key use case. The second one that is emerging right now is really, around software-defined WANs and software-defined VPN. But the teasing issues we still see there are crazy. There's a lot of new code. The Etsy Mano stack is still very complex. The OSS elements are still not very much understood. I think the whole platform stack, so looking at the hardware elements, your hypervisor, how you build all of this, how you orchestrate the NFV elements, this one is still overly complex in my view. I think I mentioned last year that this one should really. I was looking at simplification. All those things, getting together, being compressed. And it seems to me, looking at it, that we're still in expansion mode. We still keep adding new things, new ways of doing things when it comes to NFV, because everybody is bringing their own ideas to it. I think as an industry, we are at the point now that if you want to make NFV real, we'll have to start to condense channel and tunnel, because it's still crazy. And the other thing is, and kind of already switching to the next point, everybody in the industry is testing NFV or something around NFV. And I think it is an opportunity also for vendors to work, together. I think there's you maybe have heard about it, this new group, the new IP agency, which, is using ENTC to do interrupt testing of NFV elements. I think it is key also for you as vendors, because you keep repeating the same box with everybody else. Why not do it once and for all, in a multi-vendor environment, and help us get reference models. Because all the architects, I'm pretty sure, you can pick any service provider in the room. All the architects are asking the same questions, are running into the same problems. I think as an industry, if you really want to move this forward quicker, because again, it's been 3 years into NFV already, I think it's really time for some reference models that everybody can refer to and actually use and replicate, and not do everything from scratch every single time. I think, I mentioned that already, but, the shift to x86, to atom-based, CPEs for SD-WAN and everything else, it's still new, and I understand it's new, but, it's like as you mentioned, I've been doing security for many, many years, and then you look at the security bug and you realize, hang on, we've known that one for 10 years, so you tell me people didn't learn the lessons? Well, I think we see the same, again, in this brave new world, all the bugs that we had in the big hardware, the big iron back in the days, we see it again, in the NFV space. So, that really doesn't help with the confidence that space. And the same thing, I think, white box switching, in the white boxes in general, in the data center, again, I think there's a clear space for them. In the wide area network, honestly, it is very, very limited use cases at the edge that we see at the moment. And last but not least, I think I already touched on it in the beginning, is really, making this work all end-to-end. For us, beyond all the low-level architecture work we're doing, the development we're doing around the Novitas engine, is working with the industry to make this work end-to-end. I think probably not the only way, but one of the ways to compete with any of the big OTT players is, as an industry, to collaborate much more. And if you put the customer at the center of his service, it is really making sure that going forward we have some sort of an SDN NNI and the SDN APIs that go with it. So one thing we're discussing is and we've been talking to quite a few tier 1 service providers about this concept. I think we'll probably use one of the MEF working groups or the MEF LSO working groups as a vehicle for people to have a framework to build this. But it is pretty key. And if you look at this oversimplified diagram, basically we're looking at doing 3 things. Probably interconnect at either Ethernet or MPLS level, have a technical API that allows the customers to actually create service, flex service, change parameters the way they want it, and on top a commercial API to make it easy to do the likes of e-bonding, e-ordering, and having some commercial framework around this. So what we want to do with this concept is actually abstract the low-level transport, because everybody else will be doing his networking elements and the SDN protocols, to put it this way, that he will use differently. Do we need to define another NNI? I don't think so. We have clearly defined Ethernet NNIs. We have clearly defined MPLS NNIs and the various types. Let's use those and build APIs at the application level to actually interact both technically and commercially. I think that's a big push we'll get to see in the industry. It's not going to help only with point-to-point services. I think it's also a very nice fit into software-defined VPN. So, where the internet, becomes obviously a transport for SD-VPN services that are not on net, but at the same time, you kind of simplify and you shorten the path of this transport, and you actually augment, maybe not the QoS, but the quality of experience you can deliver, when it comes to SD-VPN services going forward. And there's a clear trend in the enterprise market for SD-VPN. I mean, we get the message, is probably what we need to say. So in conclusion, looking at the agenda for the next 3 days, actually nice to be doing the opening keynote, is that a lot of those things that are on our radar when it comes to Colt, are going to get discussed next couple of days. There's a full morning about segment routing. I think virtual CP is pretty big. SD1 made it on the agenda. Those are all the things we need answers to. And hopefully, one of my goals for the rest of this week is actually looking forward to getting answers on some of those things. The big question mark I still have is OSS and Mano. That's something I have to say as an industry we still haven't tackled. I don't know how many IT, OSS, system architects are in the room, but honestly, it is still very much driven by the network guys. And I think we're very much missing the point. I think what's going to drive the evolution next is how successful we'll be at building the next gen OSS and Mano stacks. This is pretty key to me. And the other one is building this choreography engine, this orchestrator on top, because that's what's going to differentiate you from everybody else. The underlying, we'll see it, as I said, evolve. It's going to be built on top of MPLS. We'll see some SDN components in there. The control plane is going to evolve in some way. The hardware will change. We'll maybe see a little bit more white box and x86-based elements. The core of the network, honestly, is going to stay big iron. I mean, let's face it. I mean, whoever thinks that you can not use big iron when it comes to high bandwidth, high packet rate in core networks, I think is a fool. And at the edge, really for us, Ethernet, is already the transport of choice, and I think it's going to stay this way. Again, I kind of put the data center a little bit aside. I think the data center world is going to be a little different because it's much more contained. You have much more end-to-end control over it. You really control what you do in there. You have little interfaces with customers and specific customer services. In the WAN, the complexity in the service space you have to handle is still going to continue, and we just need to find a way to abstract it. And really, again, the message is really, let's use SDN, NFV, MPLS, carrier Ethernet, and so on to build the next generation customer experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicolas of Colt.